The Book of Rebekah, Chapter 7, Men of Action. The armory was a low, squat building that looked deceptively small from the outside because it was sunken down into a rare piece of sandstone bedrock that thrust upwards from under the earth. In a world of tents and mud-built storehouses, a building such as this one was unusual, and Eliezer got a strange feeling of anticipation whenever he stepped down onto its lowered stone floor. Despite being Abraham's chamberlain and the highest-ranked man in the camp after Abraham himself, in this building, Eliezer was a guest. Once you were inside the armory, all the outside sounds disappeared and were replaced with a strong smell of polished leather and well-oiled metal. Letting the heavy studded door close behind him, he heard loud, gravelly voices coming from the room in the back, raucous laughter and meaty hands slapping heavily on wooden tables. Knowing better than to sneak up on a room full of armed men who'd seen battle and bore its many scars, Eliezer coughed, painfully grating the back of his parched throat. Feeling much younger than his years and smaller than his size, he called out to them, "Good day, sirs!" There followed an ominous silence. He took a deep breath for courage and strode into the back room without waiting to be invited. The men all stood up at once, hands resting on their sword hilts. They didn't look quite as scary in person as they'd sounded through the door, but they looked intimidating nonetheless. Eliezer, being at least as tall as Abraham, was not used to feeling like the smallest person in the room, but these men were huge, not just in height, but in sheer density. The men eyed him expectantly. "Please, sit down," Eliezer said. "We've much to discuss and little time." The men sat down around the table, but arranged themselves so that they were all crammed in along one side, leaving Eliezer alone and stranded opposite them. Getting started, Eliezer said, "You all know why we're here, so actually we don't. We've been in here for hours waiting, and nobody has been in to tell us anything," interjected a man, thick-set and balding. "Well, why didn't you go out and find out instead of sitting in here? The whole camp is abuzz with the news," Eliezer replied incredulously. The bald man leaned back, compressed his lips into a tight line, and crossed his arms, waiting just long enough to be rude before answering, "We were told to wait." "We waited." Eliezer exhaled slowly through his nose. He didn't have the time or the courage to get into a fight. "I'm sorry about that," he said, hair flopping into his eyes. "I thought you'd already been told about the trip to Haran." To his surprise, the men all smiled. Eliezer had expected them to look confused or worried, but one man was punching the air in happiness and mouthing the word "yes" to his comrade across the table. "Pleased?" Eliezer asked, surprised. "When we got called in here, we started to think the worst, like maybe we were going to be sent to work for Hagar," another of the men said, grinning savagely. Eliezer couldn't help but smile back. Being sent to work for Hagar was one of the more popular insults getting thrown around the camp these days. Now that Hagar's new house in town was almost finished, she'd been heard complaining that she couldn't find decent slaves to work there. "Oh, what's your name?" Eliezer could just make out some faint tattoo marks under the man's eyes. He looked self-possessed, easygoing, and quite deadly. "My name is Sadiq, sir," the man replied casually. "Well, let's stop with the sir. When we're all alone, you can call me Eliezer. Save the sir for when we're out there, yes?" Sadiq nodded. "So, Sadiq," Eliezer continued, "you'd rather risk your life traveling day and night across mountain and desert on a bizarre bride hunt with a caravan so full of gold that no man would be shy to kill for it, rather than stay home and work for the Princess Hagar. Is that right?" "I'd rather sleep in a pit full of vipers," the man said quite seriously. "All right, Sadiq, you've got the job. From now until we return here with Isaac's bride, you and I are never more than this far apart." Eliezer gestured to the walls of the small room. "Think you can handle that?" Sadiq grinned, nodded, and then, pressing a finger to his right nostril, blew snot onto the floor by Eliezer's feet. Eliezer said nothing and turned to the other men, saying, "And that goes for the rest of you too. Think you can put up with Sadiq's runny nose for the next 40 or so days?" They all looked back at him with undisguised glee and mirth. "I'll take that as a yes," Eliezer said, relieved. "Can I ask, Eliezer," the bald man again, Why did you choose us for this mission? Actually, I didn't choose you, Eliezer replied bluntly. A few of them leaned back and crossed their arms in a gesture Eliezer was already beginning to find familiar. As if on cue, they compressed their lips into that threatening little line, and Eliezer made a note to himself not to take these men with him if any subtle negotiations were needed. You could read every thought they had on their broad, canned faces. I didn't choose you. Lev did. Lev? The bald man exclaimed. But he's been in and out of here all afternoon slamming doors and giving us the evil eye. Eliezer noticed several of the men made the sign against the evil eye, reflexively moving their fingers by habit, but the bald man just guffawed and slapped the table. Sadiq spoke to him, showing a perceptiveness that Eliezer had not expected. I suspect he was sore to be doing the choosing rather than being chosen himself. The bald man chuckled. But Lev must be almost as old as Abraham. We've none of us seen much action these last years, Sadiq explained for Eliezer's benefit as much as his compatriots. He was probably hoping for one last great adventure. You know he fought against Kedorlaomer with Abraham. That doesn't explain why he chose us, the bald man said, not quite believing his luck. That's simple, Eliezer said, trying to take back control of the conversation. Through the small windows, he could see the quality of the light outside was changing. Night was drawing in. I asked him to choose 5 of his best men. Predictably, the men responded to this by unconsciously puffing out their chests in pride, and Eliezer continued his explanation. Men like you, who know how to fight, but also know when not to fight, when to keep your eyes open and your mouths shut. So you're expecting trouble then? Clearly the bald man was going to be a leader. He had no hesitation in speaking up. This is primarily a bride finding. We'll be traveling from here to meet with the kinsman of our Lord Abraham. It's not a war party. But we'll be transporting a bride price fit for a queen, more gold than you or I have ever seen. Sadiq whistled, eyes glistening dangerously, hand unconsciously squeezing his sword hilt. And we'll be taking the route up through the mountains, around Hebron, along the River Jordan, and then pushing far into the north where any number of dangers await us. This is a bold journey that no one has attempted in more than a generation. If we survive, if we're successful, we'll remember this and be remembered for this for the rest of our lives. The men looked ready to start cheering and jumping up and down, and Eliezer realized that for men like this, men of action, simple lives tending sheep and herding goats would never compare to the songs of battle, the camaraderie of war, or the glory of victory. I suspect by the end of this journey, we're all going to know each other very well, but for now, why don't we start with a few names? I already know your name, Sadiq. And he illustrated his point by tapping his right nostril with his finger and eliciting from Sadiq a pleased smile. How about you? He said to the bald man. He had a surprisingly round head and very light-coloured eyes. I am Amos. My mother is the sister of Hannah the cook. Is she now? Well, I should have recognized those eyes. That means your grandfather came from Ur in the first great journey, no? My great-grandfather. Eliezer eyed the bald man with newfound respect. His family had been bound to Abraham's family for generations. He would be able to trust this man's loyalty to the grave, and probably beyond. Then we're in good company. Thank you, Amos. Amos nodded. To the right of Amos sat 2 men, younger than the rest, but certainly not boys. They looked so remarkably alike that they were undoubtedly brothers. They also moved alike. They had the same lopsided smile and sat together as if they were a pair and not individuals. You must be brothers, Eliezer asked. Yup, they both replied in unison. Twins? Such a thing was possible, although rare. No, I'm older, said the one on the left, 11 months older. The younger brother elbowed him none too gently in the ribs and cut in, saying, My name is Abraham. He had barely finished speaking when his older brother jumped in and said, My name is also Abraham. In the driest and most skeptical voice, Eliezer said, Your mother called you both Abraham? Yep, they replied again in unison, without a hint of resentment. You can call me Abe and him Ham, the older brother offered good-naturedly. Well, thank you, Abe. I look forward to spending the next week getting you both mixed up, Eliezer quipped. Don't worry about it. We're used to it, Abe told him. Even our mother gets us mixed up sometimes, Ham offered. Well, I hope that's not a problem also suffered by your wives, Eliezer joked. They all had a good laugh, and some rather crude jokes were made about how the wives might come to tell them apart in the dark. But eventually the ribaldry died down, and everyone's eyes came to rest on the last man to be named. The only man who had not yet spoken sat placidly in the back, waiting his turn. He continued to sit very still, looking mildly at Eliezer. "You must be Gever," Eliezer said. The silence in the room was suddenly heavy and thick. "You were one of the men chosen by Abraham to accompany him to Moriah, weren't you?" This was a sensitive subject for everyone in the camp, especially those involved on that terrible day. Still, Eliezer wanted to be sure that there were no secrets between him and the men responsible for his and his son's life. People's loyalty to Abraham was absolute, but many had not forgiven him for the tragic events that led to their beloved Sarah's death. Sarah had been mother to them all, the nurse when they were sick, and the friend when they were bereaved. Her death had left a gaping wound in everyone's lives. The men who had gone with Abraham that day to sacrifice Isaac on the mountain had come back changed, and they carried with them an unspoken stigma, as if they were also to blame. "I was there," Geber replied. It was a simple statement, without regret or apology. "Then Abraham must have seen something special in you, Geber, and I'm very happy to have you with us on this journey. If there's one thing we must do to ensure our safety and our success, it's to stay together. Like Abe and Han, we'll be brothers from now on." He saw relief in Gever's eyes, and Eliezer hoped he had gone some way to dispelling the man's wariness. He must have had a hard road these years since the death of Sarah and Isaac's departure. People around here tended to speak their minds, and that could be painful. No wonder the man held his tongue. Anything he said would be passed around the camp until everyone had heard it, or some version of it. "All right, that's enough male bonding for now," Eliezer spoke fast and loud to break the spell cast over the room by the memory of tragedy, and the men seemed relieved to laugh once more. "I want you fully armed. Lev assures me you have unrestricted access to the armory, so take whatever you want, but here's the thing." The men leaned forward. This was their business, and they were eager to get started. "I don't want this caravan to attract too much attention." "So you want us to be armed to the teeth, but not look like it?" Amos asked him, catching on straight away. "Exactly. We want to look armed enough to act as a deterrent to anybody who might think of giving us a go," Eliezer instructed them. "But not so armed as to give away the fact we're carrying enough gold to buy half of Egypt." Amos again, going straight to the point. "Well, yes. Do you think you could manage that?" "Well, we'll more than manage it," Amos assured him, giving him a penetrating stare that reassured Eliezer and earned his trust and respect. "Then get started. As soon as you're ready, you can head over to the main storehouse to meet up with Brun. He'll be our guide for this journey. He's loading up the camels with Malki, and he'll get you packed up." Eliezer couldn't help but notice that Gever tensed slightly on hearing the name Brun, but he couldn't tell what emotion was underneath it. Gever was clearly used to hiding his emotions, and Eliezer hoped the two men would be able to work together. They couldn't afford arguments and feuds on this journey. The men stood up, stretching and filling the room with their massive bulk. "One more thing." Eliezer stood up too, and had to raise his voice over the scraping of chairs and the popping of joints. "After stowing your gear and being assigned a camel, you're all to head over to the tent Ochaya, where you'll be fitted with a set of spectacular new robes, fit to be worn by the men chosen to represent Abraham in the old country." A few grumbles followed, but no one objected. "And you'll be fitted out with anything else you might need, like mittens, woolen hats, and riding boots, so pack light, understood?" A gravelly chorus of "yes" and "yes, boss" rolled over Eliezer as they filed out of the room one by one through the impossibly small door for men of such size, and he was left standing there alone. Eliezer felt like he'd survived an ordeal, but he was pleased. It went better than he'd expected, and the men were actually doing as he asked. What more could he expect on the first day? The real test would be out there. Coming quickly back to his senses, not giving himself even a second to think too much about what could go wrong and what would happen if the whole crazy plan failed, Eliezer turned his disciplined mind to the next thing on his long list of things to do. Stepping out of the armory a minute later, leaving the fighting men inside to sort through the weapons they would need, he looked over in the direction of the main storehouse. Even from this distance, he could see it resembled an enraged beehive. Malky and Brun were passionately gesticulating at each other as Gabby led a large camel away, heavily laden with huge, bulging saddlebags. As he watched, Javi came round the corner with another camel and headed in their direction. This camel still had saddlebags hanging limp and empty at its sides. Upon seeing the camel keeper, Malky headed back into the storehouse with a frustrated shrug of his old bony shoulders, and Brun stepped forward with a massive chest in his arms. Javi started helping him to load it into the very bottom of the saddlebag. Eliezer was pleased. It seemed everything was going to plan. Malky might be giving Brun a hard time, but they'd get the job done. His next stop was Chaya. As Eliezer walked briskly towards Chaya's tent, he noticed how dark it was getting, earlier and earlier now that winter was almost here. People would be lighting their oil lamps soon, and just as he thought it, a woman appeared carrying a lamp, hanging it in the doorway to her tent. Eliezer walked faster. He couldn't afford to let time slip away from him. Chaya's tent glowed brightly from the inside. She'd requested extra lamps so that the women making the special robes and traveling clothes could see their work better. From inside, he could hear the women talking as they worked. "I can't imagine who would want to marry Isaac, even if he is rich," said one woman. "We won't be that rich after Hagar's finished with him, I'll tell you that," said another. "Oh, you two haven't got a romantic bone between you," an older woman scolded. "It's not all about money and riches. It's about love and partnership, which you will know one day when you've been married for longer than 5 minutes. The first woman protested. "I've been married 3 years. You've hardly spent a night together since then, and don't try to deny it." Eliezer knew it was wrong to listen in, but he found it fascinating how women spoke to each other when no men were around, or at least when they thought no men were around. "Oh, stop savaging each other," a new voice joined in now. "I want to know how 10 men are going to find a bride for Isaac. If you ask me, they should take 10 women and let them choose her." "Finally, someone is speaking some sense," was the old woman again. He realized it was Chaya. "If any man needs a woman to complete him, it's Isaac. He needs a woman who is strong where he is weak," she said wisely. "And bold where he is shy," a younger voice added. "And happy where he is not," Chaya finished sadly. Eliezer decided to make himself known while the woman was silent, and he entered the room just in time to catch the sad and sympathetic expression on all their faces as they thought of poor, sad Isaac.